Today marks a very somber anniversary. My family was not here on the West Coast when it happened on 1942. However, it does impact every person of Japanese descent who lives outside Japan. Basically, the reasoning was back in December 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and there was already anti-Asian sentiment in this country, especially on the West Coast, starting with discrimination against immigrants from China. And then when immigrants from Japan came over, there was also discrimination, immigrants from Philippines. After the Korean War, immigrants from Korea. After the Vietnam War, immigrants from Vietnam. So discrimination against Asians is not new, but this is not the first time that the United States government rounded up a specific ethnic group and put them in a specific location or specific locations. One of them is, of course, Native Americans. This is their land. We none of us have received permission from them to live on their land. So all of us are immigrants or direct descendants of immigrants. So that's one part of it. So with this, especially here on the West Coast, it is very it's still a salient issue. Because what happened, a big chunk of the people who were sent to military prison, they were migrant farm workers. They harvested the fruits and vegetables here in California. And when they were sent to prison, all of a sudden there's nobody working in the fields, nobody harvesting fresh fruits and vegetables. So the government, rather than, air quotes, fix the problem, they actually created a new one. All of a sudden, they need people to harvest the fresh fruits and vegetables here in California. So what the government did was import workers from another country to take over this role, and the country they chose was Mexico. And this is a salient issue because now the current administration wants to get rid of all immigrants from Mexico, which we're gonna have the same problem that we had back in 1942, where all of a sudden there's nobody harvesting the fresh fruits and vegetables because all of them were sent back to Mexico. Now we have to import workers from another country. So that's that. Another layer is this. There is a term. I think it was started in 1990s. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's called intergenerational trauma. A lot of people think, the current generation, the Japanese Americans, they're not affected by this. But the reality is no. Trauma from one generation gets passed on to the next generation, that gets passed on to the next generation, that gets passed on to the next generation. So I think right now we're at like the fourth or fifth generation of Japanese Americans, and they are feeling the effects of this. One, you can see on the outside, when the immigrants from Japan came over to the United States, they brought over two things: xenophobia and homophobia. Now, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, they were sent to military prison. The outcome, instead of expecting their foreign-born children to marry their own kind, now they're expecting their children to marry somebody who's not Japanese. And they're expecting their children to bring home mixed race, mixed ethnicity children. So that's trauma that's been passed down. Now, the homophobia that they brought over from Japan, that's still here. And that is creating a hostile family environment. So it's not just the trauma from what happened during World War II, it's also the homophobia that they are continuing to 2025. It's still going on. And we see one of the effects of this. This person the author is not Japanese, but she was a family friend. And while their third son was in the process of, he was succumbing to a virus, she interviewed him, she interviewed the family, and she wrote a book about what exactly went wrong with his family. Now, the first two sons, they already passed away. They were already buried in Hawaii, where the parents are originally from, and a lot came out from those interviews, especially with the third son, because the third son was the last born. They only had three children, and the last borns, they know exactly what's going on. The, but like, because the first son completely shut down all communication from the family. The second son was shot at point blank range. The person who fired the shot confessed. He says, "Yes, I'm the one who did it. I killed this person." But because the lawyers, they saw, oh, the police did not follow proper protocol when they were collecting evidence, that suspect was set free. So justice wasn't done, and last year or the year before, the father passed away. But yeah, after this book was written, the parents read her book. So, and there's a lot of things they did not know was going on. They did not realize that the way they were raising their sons was not what the sons needed. And they also had to confront the fact that even though they expected their sons to marry non-Japanese, they expected their sons to be straight, and that's what homophobia does kill people. And with two of their sons, it caused them to engage in risky behavior, which caused them to get the virus. And the second son, the one son that was straight, he felt the pressure because he knew both of his brothers are gay, and he's the only one who's going to give them grandchildren. And also, the father encouraged the second son, to prove that he's a real man, and that got them into that fight where the other guy had loaded the gun and shot him. So, and the thing is, what I do not like, when I went to college, the liberals, they were in your face about their agenda, ramming their agenda down your throat. I didn't like that. But this family, they don't do that. They don't force you to not be homophobic. Instead, they tell you, this is what happened to our family. We were homophobic. This is how it affected our children. And as a result, all three of our children are gone. And they don't want anybody else to go through that. After their third son passed away, so they did a lot more beyond what this book, because they saw exactly what they did with their three sons. And they, even though the third son didn't want to talk about the virus, they do talk about the virus. They do talk about homophobia and how that affected their family and how they don't want anybody else to go through this. So they're not in your face about it. They do admit, yes, we are homophobic, which is something I wish that the Democratic Party would do. Instead of ramming their agenda down the people's throat, they should acknowledge, they should admit they're xenophobic, racist, sexist, chauvinistic, homophobic, transphobic. They should. I would prefer. I know this is my platform, but I would prefer that Democrats, confront their own prejudices and discrimination, rather than ramming it down through people's throats. So this family, they did not, ram their agenda down people's throats. Instead, they just said, "This is what happened to our family. We don't want you to make the same mistake. That's it." They actually had talks throughout California, West Coast, and they even went to Japan a few times to talk, because they know their homophobia came from Japan. So that's this is definitely a book I highly recommend. Again, they're not ramming their agenda down your throat. Instead, they're saying, this is the mistakes that we made. We don't want anybody else to go through the same thing. So Yeah, today is mostly a day of reflection for me. My family is not was not on the West Coast when this happened. They were on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, but it does affect us because after World War II, more immigrants from Japan came to the United States. They did not know that Japanese Americans they're not they're not focused on marrying their own kind, but the new immigrants from Japan they expect their children to not only be straight but to also marry their own kind, and they don't realize that hey, this that they have already decided they're not going to marry their own kind. They're going to marry out, but where they got blindsided was the fact that their prejudices indirectly caused the passing of all three of their children. So, with that, please feel free to let me know your thoughts about this. So, this one, even though this happened like 80 plus years ago, it's still affecting the current generations of Japanese Americans, and it also affects subsequent waves of immigrants from Japan as well. Take care and be nice to each other.